It all started with a seemingly innocent desire, our shared dream of building a family. For years, my wife had been relentless in her pursuit of motherhood, pushing us to try for a child despite the growing strain it placed on our marriage. Her urgency felt like an unrelenting pressure that I couldn't escape, but I convinced myself it was just her deep longing to become a mother. Little did I know, beneath her sweet smiles and loving gestures lay a web of deceit so twisted it would shatter everything we had built together. One fateful day, after months of failed attempts to conceive, I decided to confront the painful truth head-on. I visited a fertility specialist, hoping against hope that there might still be a chance. But fate dealt me a cruel blow when the test results came back. I was sterile. The words hit me like a freight train, leaving me breathless and broken. My dreams of fatherhood evaporated into thin air, replaced by an overwhelming sense of loss and inadequacy. As if sensing my despair, my wife approached me 4 days later with what should have been joyous news. She announced she was pregnant. At first, shock rooted me to the spot. How could this be? The irony was almost suffocating. Here I was, grappling with the devastating knowledge that I could never father a child, while she stood before me glowing with excitement over something that defied logic. A storm of emotions raged inside me: confusion, betrayal, anger, all swirling together as I forced a smile and pretended to share in her happiness. That night, unable to shake the gnawing suspicion clawing at my mind, I sought answers. Another round of tests confirmed the grim reality. I was indeed sterile. Yet somehow my wife carried a child that wasn't mine. The revelation sent my world spiraling out of control. Every glance from her, every touch, now felt tainted by lies. Was this an elaborate scheme? Or worse, had she already moved on emotionally, seeking comfort elsewhere? Questions tormented me, each more sinister than the last. It became clear that the woman I loved wasn't who I thought she was. Instead of confronting her immediately, I chose silence, biding my time as I pieced together the fragments of her betrayal. What followed was a harrowing journey through secrets, manipulations, and heartbreak, a battle not only for justice, but for my very sanity. The initial shock of my wife's pregnancy announcement had barely settled when a gnawing suspicion began to take root in my mind. How could she be carrying a child that wasn't biologically mine? The pieces didn't fit, and the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that something sinister was unfolding right under my nose. My wife's sudden glow, her inexplicable happiness, it all felt like an act, one so meticulously crafted that it made me question everything I thought I knew about her. Desperation clawed at me as I realized I needed answers, not just for my own sanity, but to uncover the truth behind this charade. I started by trying to access her phone while she slept, hoping to find some clue, any hint of betrayal. But there was nothing, no suspicious messages, no hidden conversations. It was almost as if she'd anticipated my curiosity and erased every trace of wrongdoing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something monumental. Her laptop, however, remained untouched during these late-night investigations. She guarded it zealously, always turning the screen away whenever I entered the room. That alone was enough to raise red flags. If she truly believed I was sterile and incapable of fathering a child, why go through such lengths to keep me out of her digital life? One evening, while she was distracted hosting a dinner party for our neighbors, I seized the opportunity. Slipping into the bedroom, I opened her laptop, half expecting to be met with a password prompt. To my astonishment, there was none. My heart raced as I sifted through files and folders until I stumbled upon something that chilled me to the bone: a secret email account. Not only was it separate from her primary one, but it was also filled with exchanges between her and none other than our neighbor, the young, strikingly handsome model who lived across the street. What I read next turned my world upside down. Their emails were laced with declarations of love, plans for the future, and even discussions about divorcing me once the baby was born. She had consulted a lawyer friend, detailing how she intended to secure both alimony and child support after leaving me. The audacity of her scheme left me reeling. Here I was, playing the dutiful husband, attending doctor's appointments, ensuring she took her vitamins, all while she plotted my financial ruin and emotional devastation. Each word on the screen felt like a dagger piercing deeper into my soul. But what struck me most was the cold calculation behind her actions. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a premeditated heist disguised as a marriage. Every smile, every tender moment we shared over the past 9 months was a facade, a performance designed to manipulate me into believing we were building a family together. And now, armed with screenshots of their correspondence, I finally had the evidence I needed to confront her. Yet instead of acting immediately, I chose to bide my time, letting her believe she was still pulling the strings. Revenge, I decided, would be served ice cold, and I wanted her to feel the full weight of her betrayal when the truth came crashing down around her. Armed with the undeniable proof of my wife's betrayal, I made a decision that would define the next 9 months of my life. I would play the role of the perfect husband-to-be, all while plotting my ultimate revenge. The thought of her smugness when she believed she had successfully deceived me fueled my resolve. Every smile I gave her, every tender moment we shared during those months was laced with venom, my silent promise that justice would be served. I wasn't just going to expose her lies. I was going to shatter her illusion of control and leave her with nothing but regret. From the day I discovered her secret emails, I became an actor in my own life. I attended every prenatal appointment, held her hand as she complained about morning sickness, and even surprised her with little gifts like baby books and nursery decorations. To anyone watching, including her, I appeared to be the epitome of devotion. But inside, I seethed with anger and disgust. Each time she spoke excitedly about our family, each time she rested her head on my shoulder while talking about how much she loved being pregnant, I clenched my fists under the table, reminding myself of the endgame. She thought she was winning, but she was walking straight into the trap I'd meticulously laid for her. As the due date approached, my nerves were stretched taut like piano strings ready to snap. I knew the confrontation would come soon, and I wanted it to be unforgettable. I prepared everything to fertility test results, screenshots of the incriminating emails, and most importantly, the divorce papers I'd filed weeks earlier. I rehearsed what I would say over and over again, ensuring that every word cut deep enough to leave a scar. This wasn't just about ending our marriage. It was about making her feel the same humiliation and despair that she had inflicted on me. The day finally arrived when my wife went into labor. As I drove her to the hospital, adrenaline coursed through my veins. My heart pounded not out of excitement or fear for the baby's arrival, but because I knew this was the moment I'd waited months for. Once we were settled in the delivery room, I excused myself briefly, claiming I needed to call our neighbor, her lover, so he could join us, a subtle jab designed to unsettle her. When I returned, I handed her the folder containing the fertility test results and the divorce papers. Her face froze in confusion as I calmly explained that I couldn't possibly be the father since I was sterile. Then I revealed the emails, detailing her affair and her plan to drain me financially after the divorce. For the first time, I saw genuine terror flicker across her features. She stammered, trying to explain, but I didn't let her finish. "Save it," I said coldly, walking out of the room before she could muster another lie. Outside, I called our neighbor, informing him of the birth, then left the hospital without looking back. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of triumph and emptiness. The game was over and I had won, but at what cost? The fallout from my wife's betrayal unfolded in ways that were both predictable and utterly devastating. After she moved into our neighbor's house, I thought I'd seen the last of her manipulative schemes. But fate had other plans that would expose the true nature of her relationship with him. It wasn't long before their fragile alliance crumbled under the weight of reality. One evening, as I sat in my living room nursing a cup of coffee, I heard shouting coming from across the street. The sound was unmistakable: anger, desperation, and something far uglier. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped outside just in time to witness a scene straight out of a nightmare. There she was, my wife, clutching our newborn baby tightly as her so-called lover shoved her out of his house. His voice carried through the night air, laced with venom, calling her every name imaginable. She stumbled backward, tears streaming down her face, while the infant wailed inconsolably in her arms. In that moment, any lingering resentment I felt toward her dissolved, not because I forgave her, but because no child deserved to endure such chaos. Without hesitation, I crossed the street, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. "Get inside," I said firmly, taking the baby from her trembling arms. Her eyes met mine, wide with shame and fear, but I didn't soften. Not this time. As we walked back to my house, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of justice. This was the man she had chosen over me, the man she believed would provide her with the life she dreamed of. Yet here they were, reduced to nothing more than bitter enemies. He slammed the door behind them, leaving her with nowhere to go and no one to turn to except the very person she had wronged. Back at my house, I called her father, who arrived within the hour to take her away. Throughout the ordeal, she sobbed uncontrollably, apologizing for everything she had done. But apologies couldn't undo the damage. That night, as I calmed our crying son and watched her leave with her father, I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't healed me, it had only shown me how hollow her choices truly were. Still, I remained resolute. Divorce was inevitable, and nothing could change that now. In the end, the storm that had ravaged my life for months finally began to subside, leaving behind a strange mix of emptiness and liberation. The divorce proceedings concluded with an outcome that felt like poetic justice. I retained full control of our shared assets, including the house registered solely under my name, while my ex-wife walked away with nothing, not even the alimony she had schemed so desperately to secure. Her betrayal had unraveled her own plans, as the evidence I presented painted a damning picture of her deceit. The judge ruled in my favor without hesitation, and just like that, the financial noose she'd hoped to tighten around my neck was severed. As I stood on the porch of what was now undeniably my home, watching her pack the last of her belongings into a taxi, I couldn't help but feel a surge of vindication. She glanced at me one final time, her eyes filled with regret and anger, but I remained stoic. This wasn't about hatred anymore, it was about reclaiming my dignity. For too long, I had allowed myself to be manipulated, gaslit, and used as a pawn in her twisted game. But now I was free. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Without the constant tension of her presence or the shadow of her lies looming over me, I found solace in solitude. My focus shifted entirely to rebuilding my life, immersing myself in work, spending quality time with my family, and rediscovering passions I neglected during the chaos of our marriage. It wasn't easy. The scars of betrayal ran deep, and there were nights when bitterness threatened to consume me. Yet with each passing day, I felt lighter, as if I were shedding layers of toxicity that had weighed me down for years. Looking back, I realized how close I had come to losing myself completely. But escaping that toxic relationship taught me something invaluable. Self-worth isn't negotiable. And though the past would always linger like a faint scar, I chose to move forward not for revenge, but for redemption. For a decade, I believed my life was as close to perfect as it could get. I was a university professor, respected by colleagues and admired by students, a man who had built his world on logic, reason, and stability. My wife, Lilac, seemed like the embodiment of grace and devotion, a beautiful, intelligent woman who balanced her career as a dentist with raising our two sons, James and Max. To anyone looking in from the outside, we were the picture of marital bliss, two successful individuals, sharing a harmonious existence filled with love, laughter, and mutual respect. But beneath that polished surface lay cracks I never dared to examine too closely. For 10 years, I lived under the illusion that ours was an unshakable bond, one forged not just by vows, but by trust. We met at a party where fate or perhaps my meddling aunt brought us together. From the moment I saw Lilac, I was captivated. She wasn't just stunning. She radiated warmth, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. Our courtship was effortless, almost magical, culminating in a marriage that felt destined. Over time, we settled into a rhythm. Predictable routines punctuated by small joys, the kind of life most people envy. Yet hindsight is cruel. Looking back now, I realize how blind I'd been. The signs weren't glaring, they were subtle whispers I chose to ignore. A missed call here, a distracted smile there, it all added up to something I refused to acknowledge until it was impossible to deny. One evening, everything changed when Lilac came home late, reeking of alcohol, a scent she swore she didn't touch. That night marked the beginning of my descent into suspicion, unraveling the fragile tapestry of trust stitch by agonizing stitch. What followed was a nightmare I couldn't have imagined in my darkest dreams. It all started with the smallest cracks in the facade, a missed call here, an unexplained absence there, but those cracks quickly widened into chasms I couldn't ignore. Lilac had always been meticulous about her schedule, balancing work at the clinic with family life so seamlessly that it almost felt rehearsed. But one evening, everything changed. She came home late, reeking of alcohol, a scent I'd never associated with her before. In 10 years of marriage, Lilac had never touched a drop, claiming she hated how it dulled the senses. Yet there she was, sprawled on our bed, still wearing her office clothes, oblivious to my confusion and mounting suspicion. When I confronted her the next morning, she brushed me off with a flimsy excuse. I had too many patients yesterday. A quick call to her clinic later, and I learned she hadn't even shown up for work that day. My heart sank as pieces of her story failed to align. The woman I thought I knew, my dependable, loving wife, was suddenly a stranger hiding behind lies. And then came the text. Oh, the endless text. Her phone buzzed incessantly throughout the day, yet every time I entered the room, she'd hastily shove it aside or turn away, pretending to focus on something else. At first, I told myself it was paranoia, but her behavior grew increasingly erratic. One night, while supposedly helping James with his homework, she sat distracted, texting furiously under the table, her face lighting up with smiles meant for someone else. When I asked who she was talking to, she snapped defensively, accusing me of being controlling. That's when I realized this wasn't just carelessness, it was calculated deception. Each unanswered question only deepened my unease, each lie pulling me further into a vortex of doubt. Something was terribly wrong, and no matter how hard I tried to suppress it, the truth loomed like a storm cloud ready to burst. The weight of suspicion had been crushing me for weeks, but it wasn't until I hacked into Lilac's phone that the full extent of her betrayal came crashing down on me like an avalanche. After months of strange behavior, her lies about work, the late-night texts, and the distant looks, I knew something was terribly wrong. But nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered when I finally cracked open her digital secrets. Her forgetfulness, ironically, became my key to unlocking the truth. She'd scribbled her passcode in a notebook, hidden among grocery lists and reminders. My hands trembled as I entered the digits, each click echoing louder than it should have in the silence of our bedroom. What I found turned my stomach. Dozens of explicit messages between her and someone named Richard, a man I later learned was her high school ex-boyfriend. The words were seared into my mind. Every "I love you" and flirtatious exchange slicing deeper than any knife ever could. There were photos, two images so intimate, they made bile rise in my throat. She hadn't just crossed a line. She had obliterated it entirely. My wife, the woman I trusted with everything, had been living a double life behind my back while pretending to be the perfect mother and partner. But I needed more than screenshots. I wanted proof I could see with my own eyes. So, armed with Elijah's car and a camera, I followed her to Richard's house one evening. Watching them embrace under the dim streetlight felt like witnessing the final nail being hammered into the coffin of our marriage. They laughed, exchanged flowers, and acted as though they didn't have a care in the world. I snapped the photo, my hands shaking not from fear but from rage. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just infidelity, it was calculated manipulation. And I vowed then and there that justice would be served. It was a day that started like any other, but it ended in chaos, a moment that would forever be etched into my memory as the point of no return. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, silently observing Lilac's every move while she continued to weave her web of lies. That afternoon, I decided to stay home instead of going to the university, hoping to catch her red-handed. What happened next was something I could never have anticipated, though perhaps it was inevitable given her reckless behavior. While I was in the kitchen preparing lunch, I heard James shout from upstairs, "Mom! Mom! Max is climbing the ladder." My heart sank when I realized Lilac wasn't responding. She sat on the couch, engrossed in yet another phone call, her laughter ringing out as if nothing else mattered. Before I could intervene, there was a loud crash followed by Max's piercing scream. Time seemed to freeze. I rushed upstairs to find him lying on the ground, clutching his arm and crying uncontrollably. The sight of my son in pain ignited a fire inside me, one fueled by anger and helplessness. At the hospital, adrenaline coursed through my veins as we waited for the doctor's diagnosis. Thankfully, it was only a minor fracture, but the damage done to our family felt far more severe. As Lilac spoke to my mother on the phone, trying to downplay the incident, I confronted James about what happened. His words cut deeper than any blade. I called Mom so many times, but she didn't listen. In that moment, all the pent-up frustration, betrayal, and hurt boiled over. I stormed toward Lilac, grabbed her phone, and hurled it to the floor, shattering it into pieces. "How dare you?" I shouted, my voice trembling with rage. "Your negligence almost cost our son his life." She tried to defend herself, tears streaming down her face, but I wouldn't let her twist the narrative this time. Leaning close, I whispered harshly, "Don't act innocent. I know everything about Richard, the texts, the lies. You think I'm blind? I've seen you with him?" Her expression shifted from shock to terror, realizing the game was up. For the first time, she was speechless, her facade crumbling before my eyes. The day of Max's birthday arrived, and I could feel the weight of everything I had planned pressing down on me like a storm about to break. For weeks, I had meticulously prepared for this moment, gathering every shred of evidence, rehearsing what I would say and ensuring that no detail was left unchecked. This wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about exposing Lilac's betrayal in front of everyone she held dear. Her family, who had always seen her as the perfect daughter, would finally witness the truth behind her facade. And I wanted them to see it all, the lies, the deceit, the destruction she had caused. Lilac had been working overtime to make the party seem normal, decorating the house with balloons and flowers, even baking a cake herself, a desperate attempt to convince me she was still the loving wife and mother she pretended to be. But I knew better. Every smile she gave me, every laugh she shared with our guests, felt hollow, like a performance meant to distract from the cracks beneath the surface. As the evening unfolded, I watched her move through the room, greeting relatives with an ease that made my stomach churn. How could she act so oblivious when the truth was burning a hole in my chest? After we sang "Happy Birthday" and cut the cake, I called everyone to gather in the living room under the pretense of sharing a special gift. Lilac looked at me curiously, her eyes glinting with suspicion, but also a flicker of hope that maybe I'd forgiven her, that perhaps she could salvage this crumbling charade. That's when I handed her father a small envelope. He opened it slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to fury as he pulled out the photos of Lilac with Richard, along with screenshots of their explicit messages. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. "This is your daughter's gift to you," I said coldly, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "She's been meeting him behind my back while pretending to play the role of the perfect wife." Her father exploded, shouting at her, calling her names I never imagined he'd use. Tears streamed down Lilac's face as she begged for forgiveness, but I didn't stop there. I handed her the divorce papers next, already signed by me. "You can leave tonight," I told her, my tone leaving no room for argument. "This is over?" The confrontation at the hospital had left Lilac cornered, her lies unraveling like threads pulled from a fragile tapestry. But it wasn't until we returned home that night, in the suffocating silence of our once shared life, that she finally broke down and revealed the truth behind her betrayal. Truth so calculated and cold that it made my blood run icy. Sitting across from me in the dimly lit living room, tears streaming down her face, she confessed something I could never have imagined. She had never loved me. Not truly. Her decision to marry me wasn't born out of affection or admiration, it was purely transactional. "My father's clinic," she began, her voice trembling but laced with desperation, "was everything I ever wanted. He promised it would be mine if I married someone respectable, someone like you." The words hit me like shards of glass piercing deep into my chest. All those years of devotion, all the sacrifices I'd made for our family, reduced to nothing more than a means to an end. She admitted that Richard, her high school sweetheart, had been her first love, but he was unemployed back then, a struggling nobody who couldn't offer her the stability she craved. So she ended things with him and chose me instead, believing I was her ticket to both wealth and respectability. But as she spoke, her tone shifted from remorseful to bitter. "I thought marrying you would make me happy," she said, almost spitting the words now. "But your predictable routines, your boring lectures about responsibility, it suffocated me. You weren't exciting. You weren't him." Her confession felt like a slap in the face, each word dripping with disdain. She claimed that meeting Richard again reignited feelings she thought were long buried, making her realize what she'd lost by choosing me. Yet, even as she tried to justify her actions, there was a flicker of regret in her eyes, not for cheating on me, but for realizing too late that Richard couldn't provide the security I offered. Her reunion with Richard turned sour quickly after the divorce papers were signed. When her father cut her off financially, leaving her with no inheritance and no fallback plan, Richard abandoned her without hesitation. Suddenly, the glamorous future she envisioned crumbled before her eyes, leaving her with nothing but shattered dreams and 2 children she barely knew how to care for. And while part of me pitied her downfall, another part relished the irony. The very man she dismissed as boring and outdated was the one who remained steadfast, stable, and unbroken, everything Richard failed to be. The fallout from the divorce was nothing short of catastrophic for Lilac, at least. Her father's reaction to the truth was swift and merciless. When he learned about her betrayal, not just of me, but of their family name, he didn't hesitate to cut her off completely. "You've ruined everything," he spat, his voice trembling with rage as he stood in my living room that day. He made it clear that she would no longer inherit his dental clinic. Instead, it would go to her younger brother, who had always been more responsible and loyal. The look on Lilac's face said it all: shock, despair, and a desperate attempt to salvage what little dignity she had left. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Her mother sat silently beside her, tears streaming down her face, unable to intervene or soften her husband's verdict. And just like that, Lilac lost not only her marriage, but also the inheritance she had schemed so hard to secure. As for me, I walked away with full custody of James and Max, a decision that felt both vindicating and bittersweet. The court proceedings were swift once I presented the evidence, the sexting screenshots, the photos of her with Richard, and even testimonies from our nanny and Elijah. It became painfully obvious that Lilac was unfit to care for our children, especially after the incident with Max falling from the ladder. The judge ruled in my favor without hesitation, granting me sole guardianship. Lilac was allowed supervised visits on weekends, but even those were fraught with tension. She tried to act like the loving mother she never truly was, showering the boys with gifts and forced smiles, but they saw through her facade. They clung to me more than ever, seeking comfort and stability, things she could no longer provide. Life after the divorce wasn't easy. There were nights when guilt gnawed at me, wondering if I could have done something differently to prevent this mess. But then I reminded myself of the lies, the betrayal, and the sheer recklessness that defined Lilac's actions. My focus shifted entirely to rebuilding our lives, to being the best father I could be while juggling work and personal healing. I threw myself into teaching, mentoring students, and finding solace in routines that kept chaos at bay. Still, the scars remained. Every time I tucked James and Max into bed, every time I kissed their foreheads goodnight, I couldn't help but think of how close we came to losing everything. Yet, Amidst the pain, there was hope, a fragile but resilient light guiding us forward.